If you're making a game, whether that's indie or AAA, you know that even if you make the best game in the world, you really, really need marketing to make it a success. If you launch without a good marketing plan, your game can so easily get lost in the noise on Steam or other platforms. Today, I've got my good friend Hayley joining us. Hayley is a marketing expert, and she's going to be sharing some incredible tips from indie to AAA about what social media you should be on, what you should be thinking about when you're building your marketing plan, from your business objectives to your target audience to your branding and game design pillars. She covers all of it, and it's so, so helpful. So I hope you'll enjoy this. And if you are building a game and you're preparing for launch, take on board Hayley's advice and let us know if you find this helpful. Let's get on with it. Hello, welcome to the Goth Boss podcast. I am your host, Kat Burton, and today we have Hayley joining us to give us lots of advice on how to market your game. Hayley, would you do us a little intro about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I am Hayley. I, at this point, just call myself a games publishing all-arounder because I feel like I've had every marketing or publishing job title more or less throughout the years. My specialties, though, are brand, marketing, and creative. And I've kind of worked from indie, like to the tiniest indie, to agency, and then into double and triple A. So I feel like I have like a nice full spectrum at this point across games marketing as well.
Perfect. Yeah, it sounds like you've done a little bit of everything. So your advice today hopefully will help lots and lots of people.
Fingers crossed.
I always find like marketing so confusing because there are so many things you can do, so many platforms you can be on. And I feel like the ways to do it changes constantly. So how do you decide what to focus on when you work in marketing?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially as we've gone like more digital in marketing, it's become even more confusing because there's literally like you could do marketing 24 hours a day and you still would feel like you've not done it enough.
Yeah.
And there's so many different options now of like how you can reach out to people too. I'm quite a traditional marketer, so I always feel like my answers are like a little boring because they're quite back to the basics. But the things that I generally recommend to people is having three things in mind. One, what are your business objectives? Like, what do you have to do? Or why are you doing it? A lot of the times for an indie, for example, it might be we need to make enough money to obviously pay for this game, but then also hopefully be able to make another one.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you have more specific KPIs and things that you're trying to accomplish, but just as a general gist, like what is your business objective? Or maybe you have some for like the game itself. Some people, for example, like exploring new platforms or maybe there's a story they're trying to get out. It doesn't always have to be like cold hard business facts, but those are important to know because at the end of the day, you have to go back to those. So it's just basically one of the reasons that helps you narrow down all the questions or opportunities that might come your way. And then on the traditional marketing side, knowing who your audience is. And a lot of people, whether they work in marketing or on the development side, can have like a messy version of this. It's obviously not always possible to know exactly who your audience is before the game comes out, but you can use a lot of different tools and research to make educated guesses or look at your competitors. And it's important because I think a lot of people still get stuck in the trap of, I'm my audience. And you might be sometimes, but a lot of the times you're not. And even if you started out making a game that you would be the audience for, throughout development, things can change. And it's just really important to know, like, who are you trying to reach? How do they like to be communicated to? Where are they? Those kind of like very definition oriented marketing bits can help you figure out, once again, answering the questions or opportunities that come along your way. Because if your example is like a Gen Z audience and you're questioning, should I be on Facebook? Then you could be like, no, they're not there. But a lot of people, just get inundated with a lot of marketing questions all at once, and it can be very overwhelming. So having these like core principles kind of lined out, I think, is the most helpful thing. And the third one is pillars. And I always joke about like you might as well just make a temple with the amount of pillars that I like to use. But whether they're the game design pillars or your brand pillars or studio pillars, whatever it may be, they're helpful because they allow you to know who you are or what the game is. And once again, those help you define what opportunities come your way, what channel should I be on, how do I want to communicate the game, what's going to be important to get across in the messaging when we launch the game, those kind of things. If you know what your game is or who you are as a studio, it's a lot easier to navigate those questions.
That's really interesting. I love this. So we've got like your business objectives, who's your audience and like your target audience, not just your existing audience and your mates.
Yep.
And then, yeah, those pillars. Yeah, that's so important. I think knowing who your audience is, that's the one that a lot of people get stuck on, and knowing where they are online as well, because like the social like media platforms, they've all changed. And it
Yep.
used to be we were all on Twitter back in the day, and now most of us aren't, and people are moving to LinkedIn. But then you're right, if it's kids or younger audiences, they're not going to be on Facebook. So I guess which social media platforms do you pay attention to these days? I know the ones that you've sort of let go a little bit, that you're not using as much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, discoverability and social media always kind of surprises me because sometimes in marketing you'll find things are still relevant like 10 plus years on and you're confused like why are we still using QR codes, but somehow they're still relevant, or mailing lists which have become more relevant because a lot of people are like inundated by all the different social media channels. um, and I think a lot of the times they don't necessarily like die. Like Facebook is still used a lot obviously for a variety of gaming companies, whether because your audience might be younger, but you're trying to reach the parents who might be on Facebook, or you might use it almost as like kind of like bulletin board sometimes, where you're not necessarily posting like your trendy content on there, but you're posting like the game updates and you're using it as kind of like a website in of itself to just hold information where you're not putting too much resources towards it. But I think once again, it totally would depend on your audience and how they like to be communicated to and how they like hang out and talk about games. But generally, I feel like most trends have made anywhere where short form content, like has risen to the top. So whether that's like
Mm.
YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels or TikTok, that seems to be more like the more lively channels, particularly for games who have, videos and content that they could show to get across the feeling of the game. Because I think in this world where we see so much, that tends to be like the best way to get hooked into whether or not you want to play a game is being able to envision how it feels when you're playing it. And short form video matches our attention span and gives you that feeling in like the easiest bite, where sometimes it might be hard to get the full feeling through in like a static image. So that's why I think platforms like TikTok have become more important. Also, just as the younger but not too young audience has like aged up, those are the more popular platforms for Gen Z to be on as well. So
Yeah, that makes sense. And like, yeah, that short form content is, like you say, it's really good for the current attention spans. And attention is the thing everybody's fighting for at the moment. So yeah, sort of just getting out there in those little dribs and drabs is a really good way to do it. It was interesting you mentioned mailing lists, because I've seen mailing lists pick up again in the last couple of years as social media just becomes sort of, it's like more content consumption, but it's easy to get lost in the noise, and people seem to be really moving back towards mailing lists again. Is that
yeah,
something you're seeing more of with your clients?
totally. And it's funny because I think, yeah, the fact that like everything is kind of a little overwhelming. Because even if you saw a few videos on TikTok of a game you're like starting to think about playing, trying to find any like navigating away from a TikTok video to the actual thing is still quite difficult. And eventually as a consumer, you'll reach the point where you're like, yeah, I would like to hear more about this game. And especially like when it comes out, because God knows at what point of like the announcement cycle you come in on. And just having a touch point that is so streamlined, I think players like have hitched onto that now that they are bombarded by notifications on different platforms and apps and things like that. And it's definitely like been a huge upswing for the indies that I've worked on. But I think even on like the AAA side, there's a lot of resources that go into CRM and making sure that like you are basically as connected to your player base as possible. Um, the store page would be, like, the best, like, if you can obviously get, like, a notification on Steam when your game goes live,
Mm.
that's gonna be the most direct, but I think when you're talking about outside of the store pages, that's why the mailing list becomes more popular because it's, like, the clearest one-to-one. You're probably not, hopefully not, inundating them, like, weekly with news, unless maybe you're, like, a Kickstarter or early access game or something like that, but for the most part, people are expecting just 1 or 2, like, big updates from that, and they can kind of, like, ignore the other ones.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I feel like if you're gonna subscribe to somebody's newsletter, that shows you're really, really interested in either the company or the project or the game, whatever it is. Whereas
Yeah,
often on social media, we'll just follow and just consume, but we have no real intention of buying or wish listing or anything like that. It's just more you're intrigued. So I think, yeah, if
totally.
you can get people to that next step, that's almost like halfway to converting them to get in the game,
Yeah, and
hopefully.
it's almost like old school web because it's direct communication and there's no algorithm to fight. So I think that's where some people run, you're saying on social media, there's lots of different things coming at you, and you're not always like in charge of it as the developer. So the algorithm can get in the way.
Yeah, and the algorithm's always changing. Yeah, just
Yeah.
before we started recording, we were talking about the LinkedIn algorithm, and it has completely changed.
Yep.
And there's like stuff from 2 weeks ago, and yeah, we were saying I keep necroing old posts from ages ago, and I feel like I don't see that much that's latest or new. Hopefully, with Gamescom, that's going to change because there'll be lots of updates from people, and we'll see more
I'm
relevant
curious
new
to know
stuff.
if it actually will show me, like, stuff that is coming out right now. Because I also think, like, obviously, when you post, then you're like, "Oh, why is nobody interacting with this?" And then 2 weeks after, you're all of a sudden you're, like, flooded with comments and things.
Yeah, it's so weird. I hope it settles down. But yeah, it'll be
For sure.
interesting this week to see. So actually, speaking of LinkedIn and people posting updates, that leads me to my next question, which is, as players and the people that are hopefully going to buy the game, do they care about seeing the people behind the game? Like sometimes you see studios with either a founder or like a designer or an artist posting on social media and a bit of behind the scenes. Or do most players just want to see the actual game? Like, which do you find is the best option? Like a bit of behind the scenes or not so much?
It's an interesting one because I think there's 2 different sides. One is usually the biggest is just a resourcing question of, do you have the opportunity and availability to give that kind of viewpoint, and at what cadence? So I think a lot of people, like a lot of us enjoy dev diaries and like documentaries about how games are made and things like that. There's a unique, like, that's what makes it human. You get to see the human perspective behind this cool thing that you get to play. And we all enjoy that. But I think a lot of people will start out making that kind of content and then obviously they're trying to hit milestones and all sorts of other things, and then it just disappears into the wayside. Or you get really stressed out because you're trying to like keep delivering it and then somehow it almost becomes like less authentic and less human because it's more of a thing you're doing. So I think the first question to ask is like, do I have the resource to be able to do this? And at what cadence am I going to do it? Because you don't need to do it every day. Some people I think just naturally are quite good at it and that's just their personality. So for them, it's more of an organic thing that just happens. So it's not as much as like of a resourcing issue for them. Um, but otherwise, it's also, if you have finite resources, like the most important thing to show is your game. So I think that's why a lot of developers, even larger studios, lead in that way because it's the safer option. Like if you're going to be putting a product in front of somebody that you want them to purchase, then you have to give them as much reminders that it exists and as much info about the game and how it feels to play and what you do in the game and all those sorts of things first and as often as possible because marketing is often just about repetition in some weird ways if you think about it.
Mhm.
um, but then if you have the resources and the bandwidth to do things like that where you can show a bit more behind the scenes or a bit more of the people that are working on it, um, I think a lot of players, are very marketing savvy and they're kind of like done with seeing traditional marketing, like the 1950s style, like very consumer marketing. And therefore, they do enjoy being able to see the human element and the authentic part behind the game and why people are making it, but it is always gonna be coming secondary to what the game actually is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like would there be a difference as well between sort of indies and AAA? Because I feel like on the indie side, you see a lot more of the people behind the scenes, like they're speaking on their own personal platforms about what they're working on. And I feel like indies often develop in public a bit more, like they're showing a lot more. Whereas when you look at the AAA studios, everything's so NDA'd, so locked down, and it's very infrequent, super polished social media content. Whereas for indies, they're publishing more.
Mm.
I guess they are so different. Is there a right way? Is there a wrong way? Like, what do you like to work on when you're working with teams? Do you prefer the more indie continuous updates or the AAA way of doing
I like that, like, sweet spot in between.
it?
Because I think a lot of it is just because, like, as any company grows or any project for that matter, like, the more people you get working on it, the more complex it gets, and obviously, larger studios are usually worrying about, like, a larger player base who might have lots of different opinions about
Mm,
certain things, or, might just be in the spotlight more and therefore, like, attracting a lot more conversation and conflict and things like that, and are trying to protect the people that work for them. Um, Also, once again, it's still a resourcing thing because everybody's, like, working towards delivering those milestones. Um, and also often because there's so many different people working on so many complex teams, like, things change very frequently, and it would be a lot harder to just be aware of the changes in a larger company than an indie company. So I think that's another reason why that you don't see it quite as often, because it takes a lot of, information and communication just to be able to plan, like, a YouTube dev diary or, like, having some, I don't know, developer play the newest build or something like that live on Twitch. And the sweet spot of, like, being at a company that is kind of, like, established enough to not have to deal with a lot of the more, like, startup, stress, but also small enough that you're not too complex to be able to share things frequently is really fun because it's like, particularly, marketing can sometimes be a little soulless feeling unless you, like, really believe in the product, but the chance of you working on, like, every single game that you absolutely adore is pretty low, and usually the
mhm.
thing that always drives people is, like, who they're working with or why they're making a certain game, and that's a lot more fun to speak about with the community because the community is also gonna get really excited about those things too. So when you get, like, that nice in-between area where you can do a bit of both, it's amazing.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I can tell that's from the way you speak about it, that's your favorite sort of work to do a little bit of everything on it.
It's
Um,
also kind of funny, like, double-edged sword, different sides of the coin where player expectations change a lot too. Like,
mm,
if I've seen a lot of people on the indie side basically come out very strong in regards to how they're, showing their game and almost looking too professional.
oh,
Where
interesting.
sometimes that falls flat because they think that you are a larger company and therefore they put the expectations of a AAA onto you, because they think, for example, you might have, like, more funding than you really do or more resources than you really do. And that definitely happened, for example, like, when Mediatonic went from being kind of like indie double A into AAA field where it's like, "Well, we expect a lot more from you now." So that also even, like, the conversation and perception changes within the player community too. So it can be a tricky balance.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially, yeah, when you see a studio go from like that double A to triple A, that is such a huge leap. And it changes so much, right? Not just the way you market, but just the
Yeah,
whole company culture and everything. So yeah, big change for everybody, not just the fans, but the people working there too. Um,
definitely.
Speaking of people, and we'd already mentioned Gamescom a little bit ago, how important are in-person events these days for sort of getting eyes on your game? And like, they're so expensive to go to, right? If you want
Yeah.
to get a booth, put together a decent booth, like have staff there, it costs an absolute fortune to do these events. Do you feel like it's worth doing? Like, is the return on investment worth it? Or is it better for more the big triple A's where they can make the fancy booths with like amazing props and set dressing?
It is a really, like, tricky one because it by far, it's one of the hardest things to prove, like, ROI on. And the resourcing is immense because it's not even just like the cost of sending those people out there, like money wise, it's also the cost away from development if you're taking some of the devs, or like just everybody having to take off that much time. Not to mention, they'll probably need time off in lieu and they might get sick, or like you have to, like, it becomes like a big plot point essentially in whatever month that it's in. So, and it can be really exhausting. Um, I don't think you have to do live events by any stretch of the imagination, particularly post 2020. Like, we've all adapted to being very digital across all of our marketing campaigns. And I don't think AAAs have even really returned anywhere close to what we would have done before the pandemic in regards to in-person events. Um, but I, similar almost to the conversation about, like, should you show the people behind the game? There is that human connection part. And I think in the current trends that we're in the world, especially with like AI coming on board and things like that, where digital might be hard to like fully understand reality. Not that I want to get like too conceptual here, but I think people are going to crave like in-person events a lot more. I think even just after, you know, 2020, people want to be in person more and to remember what it's like to experience things, like physically. And it's great in a lot of ways that are hard to prove on a spreadsheet. But some of my favorite things about doing in-person events, even on indie scale, is one, it's a great way to see feedback in real time. Like, you can't get better than watching a bunch of random people, although probably at least somewhat related to gaming, play your game for the first time and see like where they got stuck or what they don't understand or what they really loved and their emotions as they played it. Um, but also that's probably where you'll create some of your like evangelist community members as well. Because if somebody sits down and really loves your game, they're probably going to be like a diehard fan until you launch, and they could hopefully bring their friends to come play if they're at the event or tell people about it later, especially if they enjoyed like talking to you and the team that were there. But I also think it's really valuable for the developers. Like, one of my favorite things is to bring devs to the booths and to let them watch people play the game, because I think, like anything, if you're doing something day to day on a computer, whether you're in an office or working remote, like, you kind of get lost in the sauce of doing that. And being able to see a real person play your game is kind of like touching grass. In that sense, like, it's usually very heartwarming, but also very informative. And you kind of maybe remember like why you're doing it, or why you struggled for like 3 weeks with a particular bug, or like whatever it was.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like having people play your game and just seeing them play the game. It's so lovely. And I think those in-person events, yeah, you're right. It's good for networking, like whether that's with other people in the industry or with your fans or the players of your games. I always found, because I was more on the development side a lot of the time, I found it so fascinating and also terrifying, because people find bugs and they find those bugs that you are not expecting. But it's a lot of free QA, because the amount of like issues that you find in games, and if you can hot fix, then it's great. But I think, yeah, building that rapport with players is really, really good. It's just whether or not you can do it on a budget, and maybe, I guess, if you're indie starting at the smaller events rather than going for those really big expensive ones, is the best bet.
Yeah, or seeing if there are other organizations or groups that you can get like part of a booth or something like that as well.
Yeah,
There's
that's a good
usually
point.
something, but or it's, saving up for the event that's going to be the most impactful for you, or the easiest to get to, whatever it may be. But I think there's always like a way where you can kind of try to find a way in, even if it's not something that you do regularly, but maybe at a certain point in development where the game's in a good place and you want to see how people are going to react to it.
Yeah. No, that's a really, really good tip. And so obviously when you're doing all these events and you're doing your social media and you've got your mailing list, I feel like most people, what they want is to pull everybody towards Steam, right? You want to get everybody towards Steam primarily. and get people wish listing. And we all know that like wish list doesn't equal sales. Like the conversion rate can be pretty low. Like most people just use it for a bookmark, to remind them that a game exists. But what are your tips for, so if you've got people on your main list and your socials, you get them to your Steam page. How do you make your Steam page really stand out and look good and entice people to actually want to wish list or buy it? Because it's so tricky, right? Getting people over that little last hurdle.
Definitely. And that's, if I wanted to be really boring, I could talk to you about marketing funnels.
No, go for it. Go for it. I'm here for
But I
it.
won't spend too much time on it. But essentially, like the point at the top of the funnel, the widest part, is when somebody first hears about your product or your game, all the way down to the bottom of the funnel, which is when they make the purchase. And that's why marketing tends to be like an ecosystem where we set up lots of different touch points for people to engage with the game. And that's where that repetition comes in. Because every time you're going down the funnel, like you will see a social media post or a trailer or another news announcement or whatever it is. And it starts to like work in your brain a little bit more so you can decide, is this something I want to spend money on? Or if it's a free game, is this something I want to spend time on? I have, 600 other games in my Steam library. Am I going to add another one? And it kind of takes us, like, as humans, a while to figure out if that's going to be something that you want to put that effort into. And it's why we spend so much marketing time trying to figure out different touch points for them to interact with the game in different ways. And it's why no matter what type of marketing you're doing, you should always have those really clear objectives of like, what is the point of this particular social media post or this channel or campaign or event or whatever. So that you can be really clear of like, this is what I'm trying to do. This is the type of person I'm trying to reach, and this is how I'm doing it. And then you can plot out other ways to do it across that spectrum. But in regards to Steam, I always remember, I wish I could remember the name of the person who did it, but somebody did a study where they like essentially heat mapped a bunch of people on Steam store pages and
Hmm.
where they spent the most time. And as somebody who puts a lot of love into like the copy that I write on the Steam pages, it kind of crushed me because because obviously if you work on a game with like a cool world or character or story or something like that, you want to really like embed your Steam page with that. But actually most players like don't look at that at all. And if anything, it slows them down or hurts you in the process
Oh
because
my
they
gosh.
really seem to spend a lot of time just at the top, which is no surprise. Like we talked about attention spans, looking at like the trailers and the screenshots and then that first tiny like little description and the tags. And in those spots especially really want to make sure that it's like about what your game is and what you do in the game. Like that's not the point for world building or character setting or fancy language. Like it is very direct and to the point of like these are the types of actions you play in the game. This is like the main core loop of the game, like those kind of things. um and the tags obviously more so because it is usually genre centered and it allows them to think like, oh, I played this other game that I really liked that was the same genre, so I'll probably like this one as well. And then of course it also like hooks up into the Steam backend in regards to where your game is shown and hopefully like on the right relevant games, because often work with indies to try to like tweak that until you're showing up with the right games, because you'd be surprised sometimes at how different tags can vary wildly.
Mm.
Maybe because it's so genre oriented. And then in the larger, fuller description later on, you can add a little bit more flavor and give them a bit more about like the backstory or the narrative or the world that you're entering, and use the trailers, the images, and the GIFs and everything to give them more of that like aesthetic sense and that feel. But essentially, the key advice I have is make sure that that top section gives somebody a really clear idea of what that game is and what actions you do in the game, and any kind of easy identifiers of like uh, what other genres that they might play that are similar that they would also like, to be able to pinpoint what type your game is. So just being really clear on like those genre tags. And then from a more creative perspective, my biggest tip that always seems to be forgotten is make sure that you actually mock up what your key art looks like on the store page. And more importantly, how it looks against all your competitors. So, like, if you did search for like, I don't know, first person shooter, whatever it may be. And then you see the long list of your competitors, like plugging in, seeing what your key art looks like against all of them. Because often we are trying to make, something really beautiful for the key art or like really eye catching, which are both great things. But if, for example, it's going to blend into the Steam background color, that's not very helpful. Or if it looks like every other piece of key art for that genre, also probably not going to help very much. So just making sure that you can actually get a sense of what it's going to look like on the store pages that it exists in.
I think that's a really good tip on the key art. I think I can't remember if I saw it on Blue Sky or LinkedIn, but someone was saying about how so many indie studios will look at like the big AAA games and they'll just copy what they do for their key art. And then you get people copying, say, Battlefield or Grand Theft Auto. And
Yeah.
the thing is, those games, their key art, yeah, it's good, but people recognize the branding. It doesn't really need to do as much work. Whereas
Hmm.
if you're an unknown, it needs to do so much more. And their example of really, really good key art from recently was Peak,
Mm,
because in it it's got the whole art style and the aesthetic, but you can see that it's sort of a co-op climbing game because the characters are pulling each other up. So you
definitely.
kind of get the whole vibe of the game in one image, and
Hmm.
it works so well.
Yeah, that's the other, like, as we've been discussing all along, anytime you can try to fit in what the game is in a visual sense, but that can be hard, right? Because on key art, you have to like really distill it down into something that's super easy to understand and like glancing at it in a second.
Yeah, it's super difficult, but again, it's one of the things that can completely make or break whether or not your game does well, which is wild. It
Definitely.
just comes down, same as like on YouTube, right? It comes down to that thumbnail or just one image
And
is
that's,
whether or not someone will click on a thing.
I think the other tip I'd have for general Steam page or store page stuff is to iterate and test. Like, it doesn't, there is a conversation about branding to be had about like not wanting to change it too often and things like that. But I think particularly on the indie side, especially like early days, if you're trying to get pickup like before your game is caught on, you have all the kind of opportunity to do tests or to ask people. Like, I've seen people get feedback about key art before they posted it on Reddit, for example, or if they have a Discord for their own community or they're part of other gaming communities. On Steam, you can always test like, are these tags working for me? No, let's switch them out. What if I adjust this part of the short bio? Like, is that going to help? So you don't always have to like keep it the same way forever. More like established double A to triple A might do it less often because there is an aspect of branding, like you were kind of saying too, about these big triple A's, people are automatically going to recognize it as that. So they don't really need to spend as much time like kind of using this like mobile oriented approach where you're constantly testing key art to see if it's
Hmm.
hitting the right audience. But if you're an indie, why not? Like, you might as well keep iterating on it until you find something that works.
Yeah, I guess as long as it doesn't take too much time and distract from
Also true.
actually building the thing, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so easy to get in that busy mode of tweaking and constant iterating without actually doing the thing you're meant to be doing.
Yes. Maybe leave like, yeah, that part is the like, I don't know, concepting stage and testing it for a finite amount of time.
Just time box, just a
Yeah.
little bit. Um, that's actually like amazing advice. Like all of that I think is so helpful because we've touched everything from, as say, indies to AAA, and I'm sure everybody who watches is going to get something useful out of this. One of the things that I wanted to chat to you about, sort of aside from like just core advice, is you've on your LinkedIn got down fractional CMO as a role that you do. And in the past, I've said I do fractional C suite roles as well, covering like production, tech, and CEO roles. And I feel like I've been in the startup scene for a long time. So everybody in startups knows what a fractional role is.
Yeah.
But quite often I speak to people and say I'm a fractional something, and they just have no idea what it is. So I would love to hear your take and your description on what it means to be a fractional role and how you help studios.
Yeah. New character class dropped. Didn't you know? It's funny because I also have had like many conversations with people that work in more like traditional fields like finance and things like that, outside of these like versioning games and art fields. But I think it's come about because of so many changes we've had in the industry between things like the layoffs or the overall lack of like investment at the moment. So a lot of people across the board have been working in kind of like coming together to form teams as individuals or smaller groups coming together to do things, whilst we're waiting to see if the rest of the industry like goes back to where it was. So it's probably more out of like necessity at the moment. But I've also heard people compare it to the way that like film works because they've already kind of gone through this kind of pattern, and have the same kind of mentality of like smaller organizations or groups coming together on a project as opposed to like I work for the studio for 10 plus years. And I think because I was seeing those trends and the types of opportunities that have come towards me career wise since the layoff that I went through in 2023, it just made more sense. Like I used to work in startups initially when I first moved to London from America. So it was language that I had heard, but not for a while. And then was thinking, we're trending towards people working together in this way, anyways. It might as well, similar to the store page discussion, I might as well genre myself on my LinkedIn so people know what type of work that I am open for. Like at the moment, I am currently a marketing creative lead at Rovio, which is a full-time thing. So it's not really a fractional thing in that sense. But I have the opportunity to work on fractional roles, like on a smaller scale throughout the week or on my weekends and things like that as well. And I think what really interested me about it at this particular time is we're also seeing a lot of new indie studios form. And fractional marketing usually involves obviously having an expertise or a certain level of experience so that you can help guide those other businesses, but on a more part-time and more cost-effective basis. So that's what really excited me is I was like, there are plenty of new folks that are starting out that have lots of questions about marketing. I have the ability to work part-time with different studios, so it feels like a good match, and it's definitely something I would like to do more of generally. Now that I've worked from indie to AAA, there's plenty of things that I'm very happy to, like, chat about, and have been doing a lot of consulting work anyways, so it just seemed like a natural move.
Yeah, no, your description's exactly like mine. It's like you get that leadership or exec experience without the cost of a full-time hire, which many people in games can't afford a full
Yeah,
like C-suite of all these different roles, can they? So being able to bring someone in like 1 or 2 days a week, or even just a half a day every now and then is, yeah, it's really helpful when the industry is in such a turbulent place.
definitely.
What you said about the moving towards more the film model is really interesting because I've also heard that separately as well.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of a growing conversation where it's sort of you create this squad of like amazing people, bring them together for a year or two to build something, and then you each go your own separate ways and
Mm.
regroup and do something else. And
That's
I'm definitely seeing a lot of that.
I'm so curious about I would love to chat to more film people about how they found that shift because one of the things I know comes up on the game side is when there are layoffs or canceled projects and things like that, a lot of time it gets brought up of like the loss of knowledge.
Mm.
Because often, particularly on larger scale projects like giant films or games, there are so many complexities and specifics, whether it's like on the tech side or just how to make a creative production at this scale. So I wonder how film have found it in regards to like how do you keep that knowledge base on an individual level, instead of being able to like build a studio that has been doing like a certain type of game for 20 plus years or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I guess it's tricky as well because films sort of you record it, you edit, produce, and ship it. And then aside from that distribution, it's kind of, you don't really go back in and tweak it.
Yeah,
Whereas with games, we're constantly going back in and bug fixing, tweaking, editing, adding new content. And
definitely.
so I feel like, yeah, as much as the team might disperse, there'll probably be a few core people that stick around,
Mm.
even if it's just as a part-time thing to do that bug fixing or to update socials or whatever it is they need to do.
Yeah, definitely. That's I think it might vary between like disciplines because of that.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. So obviously, like, somehow we are at the end of August. I don't know how it's happened. Games comes on end of August. This year has completely flown by. And I was going to ask what your marketing trend predictions were for this year, but we're quite a ways through. So what are you thinking for like 2026? Are we keeping with that short form content? Like, should we be on mailing lists? Like, what would you suggest if someone's just starting out and they've got a game coming out in the next 6 months? What should they be doing to sort of be ready for 2026?
Yeah. Make a great game. No pressure. But as a marketer, it's much easier to market a good game than it is to market a bad one. So that is sadly a fundamental building block, which as a creative who does other creative things in my spare time, I feel how awful that is to like admit to. But then beyond that, from a marketing standpoint, I go back to my know what you're trying to achieve, your business objectives. Do as much as you can to find out about your audience, whether it's looking at things like Newzoo, who release data for free on a quarterly basis, I think, or at least a yearly basis. Look at your competitor games and read through Steam comments and see what people like or hate. And just try to get an idea of who you're trying to reach so you know how to reach them. And try to set up some sort of pillars, whether it's the game design pillars or why you as a studio are making that type of game or something like that. And everything else you'll just deal with as it comes through, but it's a lot easier to deal with those questions and opportunities. And, how do I figure out a strategy? If you know the answers to those questions first, you don't want to really be doing them on top of each other. I do think short form content is here to stay. I have heard whisperings that people might try to bring back longer form content on certain platforms because I think those platforms are always testing their algorithms to see like what's going to get people to stay in there the longest. But I don't think it's going to be very easy to get our attention spans back. So I would say that short form content is still relatively safe.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think as well that short form content's been around for so long now, and it's just going to keep going that way, isn't it? Like you said, it's hard to get people to go back and spend longer time doing things because, yeah, we want something that's going to grab us in a few seconds rather than in 10 minutes. So, yeah, that's a really good tip. And yeah, I like the fact that it's not specific advice to certain platforms and things like that. It's figure out what your business objectives are, where your target audience is, like in this year and next year, and where they're likely going to be, and build around that and just keeping your business pillars and your branding and your game design in mind.
Totally. I think one great thing about where we are currently is the fact that there are a lot of different places to find games. And yes, there are a lot of them, but it means that you can make quite niche games or chat to a niche audience. And you might not have the players of a MMO, like quantity wise, but it probably will actually be a bit easier for you to get in touch with the right people as opposed to it's quite difficult to market a game to everybody, for example. Particularly as an indie, if you're just starting out, trying to do any type of like live service thing where you need 1 billion players is very hard. And also on the kind of like trends topic, the last bit I would add would be that because of that like ability to do niche games or have niche audiences and have a lot of these algorithms like the TikTok one that is so good at finding like these niche rabbit holes for people to go down. There have been a lot of kind of like curation accounts that have come up about certain genres or like new indie game news and things like that that are kind of more like mid-sized, whereas obviously like 10 years ago everybody was trying to get the same, I don't know, like 5 to 10 super mega streamers to play their game. Now it's a bit more spread out across mid and small size folks who might focus on a particular type of game or like genre of game. So there's a lot of opportunity to try to find those, whether it's on TikTok, Reels, or Reddit, or places like that.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for that advice. Honestly, I think that's going to be so helpful for everybody. Yeah, thank you so much for your time,
Of course.
Haley. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. And yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing this with everybody and just seeing what people say in the comments, because that is just a treasure trove of advice. I feel like it's the sort of thing people are going to come back to and listen like every like few months or so while they're building a game, just to make sure they're on the right track. Where can people find you online if they'd like to follow you and stay up to date with your work?
Yeah, I think most work oriented is obviously LinkedIn if you could bear it, but I do post regularly there. And I'm trying to get into the habit of posting like content like this there. So hopefully stay tuned for that. But otherwise, the best place would be Blue Sky because I often talk about work and games on there as well.
Amazing. Thank you. I'll put the links to all of those in the show notes so people can find you. Thank you so much, Hayley.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks.